Graphing Systems of Inequalities, Part 2. Graph the solution set of the following system of inequalities. Here I have a system of nonlinear inequalities. The first inequality is a quadratic and the second is a line or a linear inequality. We're first going to graph the top equation, which is the quadratic inequality. So I have y is greater than or equal to x squared minus 9. In order to graph this inequality, we'll rewrite the inequality sign with an equal sign. Next, we're going to find the vertex. To do that, we'll find negative b over 2a. This is going to be the x value of the vertex. Now there is not a b term because when we have a quadratic, the b term is the value in front of the x. Since we don't have an x, we don't have a b, so that means this is just 0, and it's being divided by 2 times 1, the number in front of the x squared. And 0 divided by 2 is just 0. Now I'll find f of 0, so that means I'm just going to plug in a 0 for x and solve for y. So I have y equals the 0 squared minus 9. So y equals negative 9. So my vertex is 0, negative 9. If we plot this on our graph, we'll have a point here at 0, negative 9, and the y-axis counts by 3's in this case. Now I want to find a value on the right and left of the vertex. So I'm going to choose x equals 1 and x equals negative 1 and find ordered pairs. So I just created an xy chart. So for x equals 1, I have y equals 1 squared minus 9, which is y equals 1 minus 9, which gives me a negative 8. So this is 1, negative 8. Now I have a negative 1 for x. So I have negative 1 squared minus 9, which is 1 minus 9, which is also a negative 8. So my second ordered pair is negative 1, negative 8. So I went ahead and plotted those 2 points on the graph. And if we look at our inequality sign, we have a line underneath the inequality. So I can go ahead and plot this quadratic or draw this quadratic using a solid line. Now I want to determine where to shade on the graph. So I'll choose a test point, and I'm going to choose 0, 0 as my test point, which is here. So we'll plug in a 0 for y and a 0 for x and into the original inequality. So I have 0 is greater than or equal to 0 minus 9, and that 0 is greater than or equal to a negative 9. That is true, so that means point 0, 0 is going to be included in my graph. So I'll shade inside the parabola. Now that I graphed my first inequality, I'm going to graph the second inequality on the same coordinate plane. My second inequality is a linear inequality. So I'm going to change the inequality sign to an equal sign and then find the x-intercept. To find the x-intercept, we'll just plug a 0 in for y. So I get x minus 0 equals negative 3, and that tells me that x equals a negative 3. So my x-intercept is negative 3, 0. Next, we'll find our y-intercept. To do that, we're just going to substitute a 0 for x and solve for y. So I have 0 minus y equals a negative 3. That gives me negative y equals negative 3, and I'll divide both sides by negative 1, so I have y equals a positive 3. So the y-intercept is 0, 3. We'll go to my graph and plot this on the same plane. So first I want to graph negative 3, 0, which is here, and then I'll plot 0, 3, which is here. And if we look at our inequality sign, I have a line underneath my sign, so I'm going to graph this with a solid line. And now I want to decide to shade above or below my line. So I'll choose a test point that is not on the line, and I'm going to choose point 0, 0. That means I'll substitute a 0 for x and a 0 for y into the original inequality, and I get 0 minus 0 is greater than or equal to negative 3, which is 0 is greater than or equal to negative 3. That is a true statement, so that means 0, 0 is going to be included in my shading. So I'll shade beneath the line to include that point. Now that I plotted both inequalities on the same line and shaded them accordingly, I'm going to only keep the shading of the overlap of the two inequalities. So if we look at this graph, the overlap in shading occurs in this region. So the solution set to the system of inequalities is shown on the screen. I have the quadratic represented by the black parabola, and then the linear inequality represented by the blue line, and the overlap of their shading is represented by the purple shading. So this is my complete answer to the problem.